All right, welcome to another episode of the Brown Perspective. This is RO, and I'm joined by my good friend Eduardo. ¿Cómo estamos hoy?
Sí, fue horrible, fue horrible.
Yeah, I wonder how many people are going to get that reference to De vez en cuando.
De vez en cuando.
Yeah, great show.
Hablando de
Yeah,
uno de los brujos más conocidos y más chistosos.
yeah, that's right. And in reference that's in reference to today's show, which we're trying to keep it a little bit lighter than usual. We focus a lot on politics, especially with the election next week. But we wanted to take a chance, given that today is Halloween, to devote an episode just to talk about our experiences with the holiday, especially coming from Latin America, um, growing up in not necessarily Halloween, because although Halloween is celebrated somewhat now in places like Mexico and Colombia, back
Ujú.
then in the 90s when we were growing up, it really wasn't, or in the 80s. But there were always these tales about horror and ghosts, and we have common myths also around Latin America that we thought we would share with you guys for today's episode.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is parte de nuestro folklore, of the folklore of Latin America, and I think a lot of it is informed by certainly folklore from Europe, but mostly by folklore from the Americas, from the indigenous communities here, as well as some of the things that our brothers and sisters from Africa brought with them as part of their cultural exchange that happened 528 years ago.
That's right, and it's really interesting how these things blended, and you see similar things throughout Latin America, and they don't really know the history of it. They don't know where it originated, but it's fascinating to see that something like La Llorona, which is your best example
Hmm.
of one of these legends, is that you see it in Mexico, you see it in Central America, South America, and they don't even know how it originated. And you think, did it originate from the for the same source, or is it just that all of these different cultures were bringing in different stories that were passed down through generations, and somehow it just naturally came about that two different or three different cultures came up with the same idea of this woman that is wandering around looking for her kids that she either drowned or that they drowned because of neglect. Like this, the facts, the story changes somewhat from one
Hmm.
culture to another, but the theme is the same.
¿En dónde están mis hijos? ¿Quién ha visto mis hijos?
And by the
Se
way,
escucha la llorona llorar por el río.
that reminds me of the radio shows that my mom used to listen to
Oh, yeah, those
when
were
we were
good.
growing up in Mexico. Yeah,
Las radionovelas.
yeah, those were good. They would hook you. You'd be literally sitting on the edge of your seat listening to these stories. And by the
Yeah.
way, did you guys celebrate Halloween when you were growing up in Colombia?
We did. I think in some ways, Colombia is trying to be Americanized. So I think taking on a lot of traditions and things from, particularly from the U.S., as an effort to try to be modern and trying to be hip. So I do remember celebrating Halloween. I do remember that going. They had costume contest at the school, at my elementary school, and I remember once my mom me disfrazó de pirata de papel periódico. And unfortunately, it's papel periódico, so it broke. So I felt like, part of my ass was visible in my little pirate, my paper pirate costume. So, but it's funny because like when there's a picture in the one of the few pictures I have from elementary school where I'm standing there and people are judging us, and I kind of tilt to the side and try to hide the whole with the person sitting next to me. Oh,
Oh man, that's funny.
and that's one of the customs that I remember. But yeah, I remember like going to get some candy. Obviously, is not as strong as mostly people running around dressing up. But yeah, but I remember it was a good time. It was a fun time to be a kid.
Yeah, I came when I was 9, 8 and a half. from Mexico to the U.S. I don't recall celebrating Halloween. I think we knew about it, but it wasn't a thing that we did. But then again, I come from a small town in Mexico. It's possible that in other states or in the city they did something more elaborate. But also remember that Halloween falls on the same weekend, really, or on the same week that Dia de los Muertos falls in. So usually in Mexico, everything was centered around the Dia de los Muertos, which is more of an embrace of death as opposed to people sitting around and telling scary stories and having these events or ceremonies around frightening kids or frightening people. Because the way that Mexico celebrates Dia de los Muertos, it's more of an embrace of those that are no longer with us, with indigenous elements and so forth. But I do. One of the things that happened is when I came to the U.S. and then we started celebrating Halloween. That's when I started. It started blending with my memories about scary stories from Mexico. So even though I didn't pick them up in Mexico as a result of Halloween, because they blended, at some point I started thinking about, like, where is it that I picked up some of these stories from? And again, La Llorona is a classic one, because you hear that from the time that you can comprehend other people. That's when you start hearing it and it starts scaring you with it, especially the older people. And in my small town, there were a lot of different stories. And when I was a kid, they used to scare me. They had a crazy story about a pig on a wheelchair. No, not a pig on a wheelchair. Sorry. Although that putting that image in your head is kind of funny. A saddled pig. So a pig with a saddle on it, as if somebody was supposed to ride it. And they used to scare the kids with that in our small town. And then obviously then there's also el Cucuy, which so here's the thing. All of the scary stories that I heard when I was a kid in Mexico, I didn't know which ones were universal versus which ones were not. It's only until I came out of Mexico that I realized, okay, La Llorona and el Cucuy are universal. All the other ones are shit that somebody from my small town must have made up at some point to try to scare us, right? And
Yeah, but it's funny because for us we call it Coco.
el Coco, I've heard that before as well. And you know what's crazy about el Cucuy is because Latinos joke about this a lot, that el Cucuy is our parents would use that as a way to scare us into doing something. Si no haces eso, te va a llevar el Cucuy. O if you go over there, or if you don't listen to us, a lot of variations of it, right? But the result is that you could suffer, or the punishment could be that el Cucuy comes and takes you. But you know what's crazy? I don't know if this is probably a thing on the West Coast in the Hispanic community. It's crazy how el Cucuy, we went from el Cucuy and associating that with a figure to something to fear, to Hispanic parents telling their kids, or no longer telling their kids something like, si dejas la puerta abierta, te va a llevar el Cucuy, right? That's something that's common. If you leave the door open, el Cucuy will take you. You know what some Hispanics say? Si dejas la puerta abierta, te va a llevar un negro. Wow. If you leave the door open, a black guy's gonna come and take you. So Latinos in here, maybe this is here in LA or California, but some of them replace el Cucuy with black people. And that, again, that goes to the inherent, like, racism and even the fear that Latinos have of black people growing up around them, that they could replace el Cucuy in some families.
Yeah, so that representation. Yeah, that's sad but true.
Yeah, and look, I'm not saying it because I'm criticizing. Well, I should be criticizing Latinos for being racist like that. And you know that we do. It's more about acknowledging our faults, right? It's acknowledging that the ignorance also, that that we too as Latinos could start to behave in ways that mostly our parents, so the other generation. So it is kind of funny as well. I think in today's culture, it would be incredibly insensitive to even tell that joke. But I'm not trying to say it to make light of it. I'm just saying it that that's just the reality of and that happens today. This isn't something that was happening in the 80s or the 90s. I mean, the people that I've heard these stories from are people my age whose parents were
Yeah.
saying it last year or 2 years ago, right?
Yeah, but hopefully people are now in a better position to call those things out. But I think for me, it's interesting because I think I feel like in Colombia I was definitely more, because at least in Latin America I feel like there's a lot more respect. There's a lot more sense of the supernatural, and I feel that so many of the legendas are related to the jungle. So yeah, obviously we talked about La Llorona, we talk about Coco, but then you have La Madremonte, which is supposed to be this beautiful woman who approaches you and is trying to tempt you in order to kill you. And then you have, duendes and vampiros and all these things. So, but overall, I think there's more of when I was in Colombia, I think I felt I was more connected to sort of I'm trying to look for the right word for the spiritual, for the sobrenatural,
Hmm.
that takes, because I feel it's more relevant. And then when I moved to the United States, I felt, oh, this is a more modern place, right? Those things don't happen here. The houses are newer, this and things. So much of I feel that mythology is based out of sort of the mysticism that we have in Latin America with all these stories. And I also wanted to say how much I appreciate the fact that the Dia de los Muertos is a celebration of our ancestors, of both more in a native context. But yeah, to your point earlier, it's beautiful to see that it's an embracing of this is part of of the circle of life, and death is part of life, and those who will die is still part of us, and we can still remember them, and we can still honor their memory and their presence.
That's right. It's a continuation, so they don't really see it, at least in the Native American way of looking at it. Uh, Death is just a logical progression, but it's not it's not like a finality of someone. You've transitioned to another state, and so there's an embrace of it. There's this in Western culture, the kids are raised fearing death. The entire culture
Hmm.
fears it, but over there it wasn't a fear. Like they knew that it was inevitable, that everyone was going to die, and so they embraced it in a sense. And that's why this is this warm celebration around it to remember those that are no longer here, but and also in a way to thinking that physically they're no longer here, but in some way their energy or their spirit is somewhere around. And so you try to, that's why you try to pay respects and you try to connect with that. But I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you about the two of the the leyendas that you mentioned. The Mujer del Monte, I had never heard of that one. Is that
La
a
Madremonte.
La Madremonte? Yeah, I don't think I ever heard that one. And the duendes, let me ask you a question about the duendes. Were they chasing after people? Is
I
that
think so. I think that when,
okay?
because you in Colombia before cars were all around. I think it's a very rural, very mountainous place. So you always, back in those days, you had to either walk or horse
Yeah.
or mula. So I think there's this I think cautionary tales about being in the woods by yourself or on your own. But yeah, but the duendes that try to trick you and take your stuff or aprovecharse de ti.
So, so there's another one that I would hear about when I was growing up in Mexico about these dwarves
Hmm.
chasing you. But it wasn't really because they were trying to trick you, or I don't remember, but definitely chasing you. Because there were all these stories about guys that would go from our small town to another small town, and then they would be coming back by themselves at night, 2 in the morning, and then they would see like in the behind, like the dwarves following them somehow, or the truck would run out of gas and then they would have to walk and then they would be chased. And but the other thing I started realizing once I got older is that a lot of these people that would tell us these stories, it always also involved alcohol. So even though some of them may not have been telling us just to scare us, some of them actually believed that these things had happened to them.
Hmm.
A lot of the times they were drunk. They were coming back home drunk or walking drunk, and yeah, they probably would probably see things. Maybe had a few schizophrenics in there that were actually seeing things. And this is my favorite one. One time, this one guy was telling us that they were hearing voices, and that they were that like all this like stuff around them going on, right?
Hmm.
Sounds and voices and howls. And then they told us, and when we asked them, like, so where did this happen? And they were like, oh yeah, we were at the cemetery. Like, the cemetery? What were you guys doing there? We were drinking. So they would go to the cemetery and get drunk there, and then they would come with like all these stories about being haunted. So it's probably just I have no idea why people from my town would go to the cemetery to get drunk there, but it's not it's not surprising to me that once they would get drunk, they would start like maybe being afraid of being in the cemetery and start making things up.
Yeah. Coincidence? I think not.
Right.
But it's funny because I do think that a lot of these stories were said to try to encourage good behavior, right? Don't be out late, don't get drunk, and because this bad things could happen to you if you are out there late or by yourself or doing things that you shouldn't. So a lot of it was to kind of encourage good behavior. But I remember my mom telling me a story about, I think when she was a baby and they lived in this place that they call El Castillo. So, El Castillo, kind of like the old castle. So it had like this kind of like old place feeling. And I remember her saying that, yeah, that once that my abuela heard something in my mom's room, and then that she came and running, and that she saw this guy with the scape trying to take her, and then that they scared him away.
Hmm.
So it's just all these kind of kid stories that kind of stick to you, and when particularly when because they usually tell them when you're on the younger side, so there's things that you start imagining and you start developing a healthy fear for, like being on your own. I think that's one of the reasons I don't like. I mean, I enjoy a good scary movie, but I don't necessarily watch them because I start getting, seeing things, hearing things, or being just more extra alert for any little noise that may be something that's trying to get me or that's in the house.
Yeah. So that was going to be my other question for you. So it sounds like you haven't fully outgrown
Shut
that.
up.
No,
I'm a
but
grown man.
yeah,
I'm a
but
big boy, okay? I got my big boy pants.
well, there's a lot of people that are still frightened by movies, and that's also the appeal of these movies, that people like to watch them
Yeah.
because it's going to generate this a visceral reaction out of them, and some people stay afraid for a few days after.
Yep.
And yeah, I think I had an episode in Mexico where I think it forced me to shed all this fear, because
Mm.
I think I was terrified. I was sleeping in our house in Mexico. My dad lives out there, and I was sleeping there in one of the rooms, and my dad was in another room, and it was like 3 in the morning, and I hear these noises outside, and they're right outside the window, and I must have been like 15 or 16. This is when I went back to visit,
Hmm.
and I was terrified. I mean, I was literally under the sheets, you frozen, stiff,
Yeah.
just expecting some.
Because the sheets are gonna protect you, right? Because somehow if you're underneath the sheets, you have this shield that's gonna protect you for whatever's out there.
I was frozen stiff. At that point, I had come to terms with the fact that something was literally outside the window. It was gonna come and take me, and then, um, it wasn't until like weeks later, or days later, I don't know. I think I told that story to someone, and they were like, "Oh yeah, they were cows," because the cows get into the houses sometimes,
Oh.
and I, I didn't. I mean, look, I knew that they have cows in my town in Mexico, but during that time of the year when I went, they're usually out in the fields. They're not in the towns. But then, like, yeah, sometimes they come down to the towns, and they get into the houses, and that's very likely what you heard, because the noise was literally right outside the window, and it did sound like it was a cow just walking around and stepping on things that would make noise. But what
Yeah.
happened was, see, I didn't know that at the time, and so I had to go a few weeks with just the knowledge that something had been outside the window. And so for the next few nights, I couldn't, or I had a really difficult time getting up to use the bathroom at night. So I would end
Oh,
up just
yeah.
holding it. And the problem is in Mexico, and it's a small town, some of these houses, the way they build them, you would have to step outside, or at least cross the patio in the backyard and then go into the bathroom. So it's not like it's not connected to your house the way that it is here in the US.
Yeah.
So some nights, I think the first few nights after that, I would just hold it and not go at all, or wait until there was light out. But then I think one of those nights I couldn't hold it anymore, so I had to go outside. I had to walk out, and so I said, I suppose this is the moment of truth. I'm going out there, and if whatever's out there gets me, then it gets me, and if it doesn't, then I'll have proven to myself that it's nothing. So I went out there, and instead of just running across the patio and getting into the bathroom, I went out there and I said, okay, well, here I am. And then I stepped into the backyard and I stood there. And I stood there for like first 5 seconds, then 10 seconds. And I think in my mind, I didn't say this out loud because I'm not, right. If you say it out loud, it seems like to me it's kind of weird to say it out loud. But in my head, I was just like, well, look, if you're out there, come and get me right now. This is it. This is the chance. So I was like daring whatever was out there to come and get me, and nothing happened. So I was like, okay, so I guess this settles it. There's really nothing. And I think ever since then, I shed all that. I watch scary movies,
Mm.
and they don't really do much for me because I've come to terms with the fact that it's all in our head.
Yeah. I thought you were gonna say that you saw the two chicken fillet cows in front of you telling you to eat more chicken.
No, no, no. I mean, if I was seeing stuff like that, then you should be alarmed and maybe call a family member to go check me in for
Yeah. No, but I
exhibiting.
have to say that that's great that you kind of were able to outgrow your fear in a very intentional way. So
It's
I
like
think
cold
that even
turkey.
it sounded like that going through that experience just kind of helped you overcome that.
Yeah, because it was terrifying at the time. I mean, like we just said, there's grown men and women that are still afraid of these things, and you can imagine 15 or a 16-year-old kid. I mean, you're impressionable at that age. That's when you soak in a lot of these stories, a lot of these urban legends, and you believe them.
Hmm.
So I was out there by myself, and I had to make a decision. Am I going to stay afraid, or am I going to go outside and confront whatever it is that I think it is? And yeah, like fortunately for me, I went outside and there was nothing there except I think at some point in the future, at some point years into the future, I did go out once and I literally saw a cow there. And it startled me because right, anything outside that moves, it'll startle you because you don't know if it's like someone else or if it's something that poses a threat to you. But then afterwards, when I saw it, I thought, oh, okay, now this kind of like this brings me full circle. Now I can think back like 7 or 8 years from whenever it was to the first time that I was scared.
Yeah, and you came out and you were like, "Come at me, Cucuy. Come at me, bro.
Come at me, bro.
Come at me, Cucuy. I got you."
I was never afraid of El Cucuy. My mom never used it as a tool against us, to be honest. Um,
Well, it's funny because there's that canción, right? There's the duérmete, niño, duérmete ya, que si no te duermes, el coco vendrá, o algo así.
yeah, see, she never used that on us, and that's because my mom stepped away from Catholicism when I was young. So I didn't grow up with a lot of the norms of whatever it is that a Catholic upbringing would give you in a Catholic family. So my mom rejected all
A,
of
a,
that.
hel- a healthy fear for the supernatural.
Yeah, but she replaced it with other stuff that doesn't make any sense. So
There you go as a trade-off.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. So to the people out there today that are going to go out there trick or treating, although it's going to be interesting how that's going to happen with the with this lockdown that we're under. But enjoy
What?
yourselves. Yeah. Try not
And
to. Go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna say, and be safe. Try to be as safe as you can be.
Yeah, and also just be mindful that some of these things that you tell impressionable young kids, they remember those things for life.
Like you could be traumatizing them.
Yeah. So just
But at the same time, I think there is some stories that I think at the appropriate age can be shared, so that way they can, because I think it helps have that cultural connection.
yeah, I don't know where the right balance is. I don't know when it is good to, or what is safe or adequate to share with them, and then when you it is that you cross over into the realm of overprotecting your kids and
Mhm.
sheltering them from things. I'm not really sure where the right balance is. So,
So are you gonna tell them about Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy versus telling them about the Cucuy or La Llorona?
well, I'll tell them about all of them, but I'm just gonna tell them that they're all fake.
Come on, man.
Keep it consistent.
You gotta let your kids have a childhood.
Well, there's plenty of stuff that they can be amazed and in awe of. I mean, I'll tell them that we have no clue how many stars there are in the universe. I mean,
Wow.
that's as fascinating as them being mesmerized by Santa Claus, isn't it?
Yeah, it is at a very deep and intellectual level. It is.
Yeah, cool. Any other words before we wrap this up?
No, I just saying that I know that Halloween also kind of has become very commercialized, like so many things here in the United States and across the world, really. But I think what I do like about this time, it is an opportunity to reset. And I think I like what happens here in California in the Southwest, where it is about Halloween and about sort of that American tradition, which I think is Germanic in origin from Germany,
Mhm.
but also the Dia de los Muertos and the celebration of our ancestors and thinking about those loved ones who passed away. I know a lot of people may have lost people during these pandemic, whether it was the virus or because of other reasons. So I think it's nice that at least we're finding ways to be able to live with both traditions and both perspectives. And I think we in some ways are reconnecting with the truer meaning of this time of the year. So enjoy, be safe, get so much candy. Hopefully you go to places that they have sneakers bars and peanut butter Reese was it Reese's peanut butters?
Yeah, the
You know,
good.
like the good candy, the
Yeah,
candy
the
that you
good
get
candy.
in the rich neighborhoods.
That's right. Very well said. Very well said. Okay, entonces, if you like what you're listening to, forget to follow us at Brown Perspective. You can find us on YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. Nos vemos.
Ciao.